Disposable heroes of hypocrisy on full display today on the Jake Feinberg Show. Welcome back inside the studios of KEVT Power Talk 1210 AM here in Tucson. Already today we've heard from legendary drummer Terry Silverlight and author Brian Hassett, and now is an honor to introduce just a phenomenal musician and also a loyal member of the Jake Feinberg Show, Charlie Hunter. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. What's up, man?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I got to tell you something. I want to ask you straight from the gate here. You are a loyal member of the Jake Feinberg Show. I am active on new media, and I've noticed you have, you've taken a liking to some of the excerpts I put up there. Can you talk a little bit about what resonates with you about my program?
Oh, well, my friend Adam Dorn and I, before I even knew about your program a couple of years ago, we had this idea, we spend so much time around musicians, and many of them from, the generation before us, and, our worry was that, man, this beautiful culture we have, it could become extinct, and we want to get the stories of these people that we know and love and, have them there so we have them when these folks are still around. So we assembled a bunch of them, and then I found people posting about your show, and I was like, oh, man, Jim Keltner interview, I need to hear that. And, and I started listening to him, and I was like, man, this is great, Well, so for the same reason,
I mean, it's more, it's like people say it's about keeping the music alive. I mean, for me, I look at these cats, like you said, the generation before yours, generation before mine, I look at them as real human beings. I mean, I can't get truth from pundits or media analysts or politicians or athletes, but I can still get truth. Right. I can still get truth from these guys. And I just wanted you to talk, if you could, the first experience your mom, you're a New England cat, but you got in a school bus and in a yellow bus and drove out with your mom to Berkeley. And I wanted you to...
It was actually a camouflage bus, but I think there was a little yellow left. And, I was born in on the East Coast, but I, lived on a school bus for, I think, 5 or something years. And then we eventually ended up in Berkeley, California, which is where I grew up.
Okay, so this is very fascinating. So let's just do this first question first. Can you talk about somebody from when you were still an impressionable young kid that some kind of transcendent musical figure, you couldn't have landed in a better place than Berkeley with the African jazzers and the things had moved a little bit, but who was one of those one of those transcendent figures that you met that had that initial impact to jolt you into melodic improvisation?
Well, I don't know about melodic improvisation, but just the guitar vernacular and the blues and basically music in general, because at that time Berkeley was a place where really all the freaks in America kind of ended up, the Bay Area in general.
Yeah.
But at that point, San Francisco was, more, I think, San Francisco was San Francisco's beautiful place, but it was a little more monochromatic than the East Bay, which really had everything, because even then it was more affordable, so... in the town I grew up in Berkeley, this is a town of, I think back then, maybe 100,000 people. In the 70s, there were, in Berkeley, 10 or 20 nightclubs going 7 nights a week. And we had a Pacifica radio station, KPFA, which my mom had a show on. And there was also KALX, a college radio station. We had KDIA and KSOL, which were these stations which, had a lot of soul music, and at night they would play, more gospel, and you could hear stuff, even more stuff you wouldn't hear during the day on. They'd be playing like O.V. Wright and Syl Johnson at night,
Syl Johnson.
So, you were surrounded by this music, and not just in that kind of secondary way, but in a real primary way. Everybody, my mom worked in a guitar store. She repaired guitars, actually, for 2 guitar stores. One was called Subway Guitars, which, I don't know, you may have heard of. That track you were playing by Hypocrisy, the singer on that track, Michael Franti, and I met at the guitar shop Subway Guitars, which was, not just a guitar shop, but it was kind of like a real clearinghouse where all the music and political people would kind of be. So he repaired guitars there, and I taught guitar lessons there. But this is getting farther in the future. But there was also another guitar store called Secondhand Guitars, which was about, I don't know, half a mile away from Subway Guitars. And so, you know, we would, as teenagers, go hang out in Subway Guitars and play their guitars until they kicked us out. And then we walked to Secondhand Guitars and do the same thing there until they kicked us out. So Secondhand Guitars, in the back, in this tiny little room, I mean, we're talking maybe 50 square feet with no windows, was where Joe Satriani, the local guitar teacher, would give lessons. And Subway Guitars was where, you know, because we were big blues fans, because that's what our parents liked.
Sure.
You know, they liked, my mom especially, she came up in the whole Greenwich Village folk scene. So, you know, the stuff that she would take me to see would be Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee and, you know, Reverend Gary Davis, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so we knew that if Clarence Gatemouth Brown was playing Larry Blake's on Thursday, that we should go to Subway Guitars on Friday sometime in the afternoon, because he and his band would definitely come by there.
Wow.
So, you know, we would sit around and wait for those guys to come by and just listen to them play, you know. And, you know, I remember Ry Cooder coming by that store. I remember Brownie McGee coming by the store. Everyone, you would just see them. And if you were not too obnoxious and you were quiet, you could get some knowledge. But I remember a specific moment when I was about 12, I think, maybe even 13. My mom was a real political activist, and there was a man who had been jailed, trumped up, you know, typical kind of Oakland police at that time. And he happened to be African-American activist. And so they put on this big benefit for him in a warehouse in Oakland. And John Lee Hooker played. He was the headliner. This was like 1978, 79 or something like that. And I remember going to this gig because, you know, it was just my job to hand out flyers and, you know, do whatever else was expected of us. And, you know, they had a bunch of chairs, and I sat down, and there's this organist, and, you know, he had like an organ trio, and he played. And they started this shuffle groove. It was just like, boom, 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 boom. It was just one of those ridiculous shuffles. And immediately I started was instantly locked on that, like, you know, like a pit bull on a rag doll.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it was instantly, the lights went off my head. And then John Lee Hooker started playing, and actually I fainted. I actually fainted, and there was like, is this kid okay? You know, I mean, not that people in the 70s really cared what happened to like a 12-year-old, to be totally honest, but so that was my real deep experience with music, you know, and it's pretty much been that way ever since, you know.
Well, I mean, this is, you opened up about 3 other questions. I mean, would you say your mom was someone coming out of the beat movement, or was she a little bit after that?
No, I think that they were a little bit after that. I know, you know, and again, you know, who I hope she's not listening to this. Maybe she is.
She will eventually.
You never know how reliable people's, you know, memory is about those things. But, you know, they were, my parents met in Greenwich. They met at WBAI, where they both worked.
Absolutely.
They were broadcasters like yourself.
Wow.
And, you know, so I know my father was a big Trotskyite, and his buddy was the guitar player and singer Dave Van Ronk.
Oh my God!
And they were like longshoremen Trotskyite.
I love
you know,
this stuff. I love it.
But really, I think mostly what they did is they just drank a lot of booze and played music. You know, my father played banjo, and my mom was at that time really into, you know, Mississippi John Hurt and, you know, all of this, Son House, I think she probably even saw, and then Reverend Gary Davis, who was living in New York at the time. And, you know, I mean, they were, you know, super fans, and they lived in the Village. And so this is probably the early to mid 60s. Definitely not beats, more, I guess, folkies, you know.
Well, that to me,
she never really cottoned to electric music of any kind.
But here's my
so,
question.
It was embarrassing for me when I was a kid because, I'm coming up in the 70s and 80s, and, we really liked blues, but we really liked electric blues. We liked Magic Sam, and of course, Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters, and Guitar Slim. I mean, those were all the records we had when I was a weirdo teenager. But when my friends came over and she'd be playing like Lead Belly or like, Robert Pete Williams or Barbecue Bob, I'd just be like mortified. It's just so embarrassing,
Dude, I think that sounds pretty hip for me. But I mean, I would have been as a teenager mortified as well. Do you remember? I've done so much. I mean, I've taught so many of the cats. Could have been Yorma Kaukin and David Bromberg. These guys were so influenced by the Reverend Gary Davis, and there's something that speaks to the authenticity of these guys, and I think that's one of the reasons that you. What I like about your point, your point of departure and your point of view is just the idea that you want to make sure that that authenticity doesn't leave our zeitgeist, doesn't leave our culture, and your mom was very much into the authenticity of these guys. The fact that they didn't have teeth. I mean, Reverend Gary Davis was blind. I mean, he did not have he did not have an easy upbringing, but the music came through him. And I think that to me, those messages, to me, it's just what your mom was doing for you was indispensable because she was really teaching you how to channel the music through you. And you tell me if I'm right or wrong about that. 5 years on a bus.
Well,
I mean that
it's not. I mean, it's funny. I meet a lot of people who are kind of like, I guess they call themselves hippies, but right. I'm like, I don't mean to be. I don't want to put them down or what they're doing down, but it's just like, that whole hippie thing, especially when you're a kid and you're around a lot of very, let's just say transient people. It wasn't all. Peace, love, and granola. Let me tell you that much, man. It was pretty dark.
Right,
it could be very, very dark. And I understand where those, in retrospect, I understand where those people, as an adult with kids myself, I understand where those people were coming from, people who had grown up in this just hyper Ozzie and Harriet, uber racist, society. And I understand what they were going for, but there were a lot of casualties on the way there,
Mm-hmm. Can you cite an example of something that you saw that really? Because I mean, I've talked to Michael Shreve and Carlos's drummer, and this is again, you were still a kid at this point, but even in the early '70s, again, taking it out of going back on the West Coast. I mean, he was looking at his friends; they were all roadkill. The drugs were taking the toll, and they moved into the spiritual component of jazz. But I mean, can you cite an example of the darkness? Because the people you're talking about are people that are called Trustafarians, right? I mean, they have the money.
I guess so. Yeah.
They have the.
I mean, it's an entirely different.
Right. So, give an example give something outside of the granola that's going to help people understand what that lifestyle truly was about.
Well, it was not. You were just lived by the skin of your teeth. I mean, my younger sister and I spent most of our time on the street, to be totally honest. I don't know if you know Paul Butterfield Blues Band, right?
Of course.
Well, his son Gabriel and I were little street urchins. We spent all our time on the street collecting returnable bottles or doing whatever else, we needed to do to figure out ways to kind of get ahead. A lot of funky stuff happened, and we were just kids, so, it's these adults, they were making some pretty poor choices ultimately. And the kids were the ones who ended up really having to pay for those choices at the end of the day. I can't really go into too much detail because there's just too many people still alive.
No. It's fine. You know what it is? I want to be clear about something. Your mom, Butter. I mean, they were trying to make sure that you were learning life lessons. They weren't being irresponsible. I mean, they were just trying to teach you what to get out there and get sort of a life experience. Is that right?
I don't think so, to be totally honest.
Really?
I think they were just the majority of the people from that generation, they were just rebelling as much as they could against their reality. And I think that their reality that they grew up in was so all encompassing and boxed them in so much that their reaction to that took it took primacy over everything else, and also to the disadvantage of everything else around it, But hey, that was how we grew up, and at the end of the day, it's no one. People growing up in the suburbs don't have it that easy either. So what are you going to say? It's the hand we were dealt, and you learn how to deal with it, and you have some colorful stories at the end of the day.
All right, I'm going to read this. This is a little bit talking to Charlie Hunter here, who is blowing my mind with some of the hard scrabble upbringing. But maybe that's why he can swing so hard, But it's that. I'm going to read this quote. I interviewed this guy last week, and I'll tell you who it is. He said,
"Well, see, you say hard scrabble and that usually entails." Illiteracy. But the fact of the matter is the people we were around, we had no money. Everyone was on welfare and selling blood. But these were like the sons and daughters of Ivy League professionals. So, you have the twin kind of things where you hear people talking about Marxist dialectic and Heidegger and Keynes versus, the Chicago school, and yet you're like eating government cheese at the same time.
What is it? Is that called,
it's a very bizarre kind of way to come up.
Call that the dichotomy, right? I mean, that's that you just nailed that.
Totally.
That excerpt's going up on Facebook immediately. That's an awesome way to put it, because for my generation, we need to hear that stuff. I'm just going to read you this quote for a minute here by this guy, and then I'll tell you who it is. I got my first steel guitar in the 8th grade, and my first professional gigs were with Earl Hooker and Big Moose Walker. The tuning on my steel guitar is mine. No other steel guitar player uses that tuning. It's an A7th open. Most people start with the slack key, and they can't get out of the slack key to play straight bar keys. I eliminated that by making the A7th a double A on the bottom so it could have extra bass on the bottom line. I'm not a musician, okay? But that's a steel guitar player named Freddie Roulette. Do you know that cat?
Yes, okay. I was going to say that was Freddie Roulette.
I should have given you the chance.
I used to see play when I was a kid.
Who was he with at that time? I need to hear the band he was with.
I think that what I heard was, because, there were a bunch of those clubs in Berkeley. There was like Larry Blake's, there was Earl Solano Club, there was Ruthie's Inn, there was, of course, Eli's Mile High Club in Oakland, and they all had house bands, So I'm pretty sure he played with the house band at that time, and I, to be honest, I couldn't really tell you who it was.
Well, it's okay. Hunter, I want to tell you, his house just burned down. He lost everything.
Oh, no.
No, I want to tell you this because there's a couple of benefit concerts coming up, and you may be one after the new year. There's one today. But the sicker thing is that he brought one of his steel guitars out to the lawn and went back in to get his roommate who was handicapped. And when he got back out, someone had ripped off the guitar too. I didn't.
Oh my God! Yeah, that's the worst.
Well, man. Listen. I mean, the point is that the Jake Feinberg show is about uplifting people. So I immediately called my connection in the Bay Area. I said I want to get Freddie on the show, take his mind off of it. And we did this great interview. He's talking about getting more bass. I'm not a musician, so what I just read there was, I don't even know what he's talking about. But what I want you to talk about is how you wound up developing your bass chops. I mean, you have a very distinct style on the bass, and could you take us through that, because you're not just a guitar player.
Sure, and thanks for even investigating that deeply into it.
Right.
Well, it came from, when I was about 20, I had a friend that I knew from high school, a French guy, Thomas Hollier, if you're listening to this, hello. He and his sister had this tiny little apartment in Paris that was, maybe the thing was 300 square feet. I don't know. He's like, dude, my sister's going to be on for a month, so why don't you, if you can make some money. So I saved up some money and got a plane ticket there, and I had a mouse amplifier and a guitar, and that was about it. And I didn't plan on coming back. I was just going to go there and see what happened. And I ended up being a street musician in Europe for 3 years. And a big part of that was, you'd have to play a lot of unaccompanied stuff. And at that time I was really into Joe Pass and Tuck Andrus and trying to learn how to, play I mean, it's a bad thing to do, but it's like, trying to fill as much space as possible,
Absolutely.
And I was always had really good facility on the instrument, and I didn't know. I just assumed everybody did because I came from Berkeley, where it seemed like every other house was a guitar player, so you just grow up around this guitar knowledge. So I was there, and I always played drums growing up too. That was a big instrument for me. I played a lot of bass, and having listened to all that, been in that situation, it's just like, man, I want to slowly. I guess I just developed something over the years that kind of, sated my need to have that counterpoint and to have that sound and to be able to kind of make the groove happen with that extra range, And when I was starting out, getting some type of notice playing around the Bay Area, and I had a couple records on Blue Note, I was really just kind of doing what I thought was the right thing for me to do, which was, to just try to play, all my quote, stuff, so lots and lots of, linear stuff on the guitar and, a lot of bass and all this stuff. And then as, I really was trying to kind of very insecurely fill the role of both a bass and a guitar. And, every now and again it kind of worked, but I realized through time, and, I just feel like in the last 5 years, I've finally gotten pretty good at it, and it's because I let the instrument be what it wanted to be, which is, really just a real giant electrified version of something that, maybe Blind Blake would have done, or Joseph Spence would have done, or Baden Powell would have done, And I try to think of it that way and think of it as a folk instrument first and foremost, regardless of how much complex counterpoint or harmony goes into it. And as long as I think of it as a real folk music, that the whole point of it is to be grooving rhythmically and with the counterpoint, not independent but interdependent parts, then I really felt like I really had something that was different. That is like, you have a guitar and you have a bass, and the analogy I would use is, well, a couple thousand years ago or more, there really weren't a lot of people in Japan, and they were originally from, who knows, China, maybe Korea, and they went over there and populated it. And as time went on, they developed into another culture, and that's hopefully, I hope what I'm doing with this instrument is, developing it into something that comes from the bass and the guitar, but ultimately is its own thing. Like any folk instrument, it's everything is hybridized,
Well, I don't want you to be too modest. I mean, it's clearly an innovative thing, and what you're doing on this program is, I guess, was there a time in Paris when you just were like, I want to be able to swing, I want Jim Huart, I want that bass, like I can't play traps and guitar, so I just need that, that pulsating, bass. I mean, how did that? And then I guess the other part of it was the insecurity that you speak about. Was it just trying, like you said, you were trying to play the parts of both those players, and you realized you could say less, more with less? Is that right?
I think it was also just, I kind of painted myself into a corner with this thing, and I got a lot of notoriety before I really was ready for it.
Oh, right on.
But I think when I was coming up at that time, like in the 90s, like early 90s to mid 90s, that was right at the time when, almost overnight you go from hearing a lot about people like Arthur Blythe and Lester Bowie and the Art Ensemble to overnight they're gone, and they're replaced with this whole concept of the neo-traditionalist and, this whole new kind of bebop thing, which were guys my age. And at that time, it was what was a real, kind of benchmark was, well, are you authentic? Can you do these specific things that are specific to this way of playing jazz? And if you're not, then you're really, no one's gonna really have time for you. And I think I'm glad I went through that and attempted to learn that. I learned a lot, but it's really, don't really have much affinity for playing like that ultimately. So, I just was doing what I felt I had to do to kind of compete, so to speak.
Well, I was lucky enough almost a year ago to the day to interview Alan Toussaint, and he said,
"Wow."
He said, "Don't let the applause confuse you too quickly in your career." And did you ever get off on any? Did you play his tunes ever? Did you get off on him?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally, all the time.
Oh, that's great. Because the guy. I mean, that's why I'm so happy that my show exists in this form, because to be, and really one of the cool things is like, I've never gotten the nod from Downbeat or Jazz Times or any magazines. I don't care, because you know what, you transcribe this stuff, and while they're going to put it out in their next issue, I'm blasting out excerpts simultaneously. So it's new media,
exactly,
and it's freaking awesome, and it's great to recognize that. But I also like the perspective of you really knowing that you didn't have your sea legs. Can you talk about how you dealt with the adversity when you were getting really popular, even though you knew you did not have your chops together? How did you handle all that?
Well, I mean, I had my chops together. I think I did, like, for a young guy. I mean, I definitely was. When I listen back to that stuff, I kind of cringe. But when I compare it to, like, a lot of the stuff that was happening at the time, I think it was kind of on par. You know what I mean? But I think, with any kind of new instrument or new thing, it's like chasing a rabbit. And sometimes you chase the wrong rabbit until you realize that it's time to chase another one. But chasing any rabbit is going to build up your muscles and your endurance. So it's all good regardless,
That's always good. It's always good to chase tail. I'll tell you that much. But we got a piece of music here I wanted to play for you, and then we'll come back and break it down. Okay.
Okay.
Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, sponsored in part by the Stereo Hospital, the Circle Tree Ranch, Abbott Taylor Jewelers, and the Jewish Community Center of Southern Arizona, and we thank them for their support. All right, Mr. Hunter, what do you got for us? What's that tune?
I want to punch that guy in the face. That was a tune, the Nirvana tune, right?
That's right, Come As You Are.
Yeah. Oh, my God. And see, that's the thing. I was just listening to that. Just like, that guitar player is annoying the hell out of me. Stop with all those absurd little jazzy notes that don't mean anything.
Okay, but
that's what. Yeah, I just spent too much time around saxophone players and guys who went to music school, and they're all fantastic musicians. I don't want to put them down, but that's just not what this instrument should be doing, you know.
Well,
But it
yeah.
took me a long time to figure that out. From that band, that trio that I had, the stuff that really resonates to me is when we get funky, because that's what we grew up on. That's our kind of folk music, you know. And but, you know, I wanted to be jazz so much. It was so important to me. And it's funny to listen back to that, because, you know, what they say, youth is wasted on the young, you know?
Well, I mean, listen, you can be self-critical. I mean, to me, it's like the fact that you're trying to, you know, put jazz aesthetics on a Nirvana tune, and you did it pretty darn well. The funniest thing is to see Ramsey Lewis's expression when he introduces you. And he's like, or whoever the MC was like, so what song is that? And you say, you know, and he's like, who's that by? You're like, it's by Nirvana, you know. And he totally looks at you like wide-eyed, like, wow, I don't even know who that is, you know. It was, I mean, I just, you know,
Ramsey Lewis, by the way, is a fantastic musician and a really awesome, super cool dude. Just
well, I talked to Ramsey. He's a badass. He's the man. And I'll tell you, he's a lot more accessible than other Titans at his level, which makes he's a very decent guy, and he's really still trying to spread the language. I mean, can you talk about Charlie? I mean, you are a gut bucket, you know, greasy, funky player. You know, were you? I mean, so your mom was spinning, you know, prestige, you know, folk albums, but were you into like the Boogaloo Joe Joneses, and were you buying the prestige stuff, like those jazz guitar players that bordered on the swamp boogie funk kind of stuff?
Not really, to be totally honest. I mean, I didn't like jazz at all
Wow.
when I was young. Like I was into, like, you know, electric blues, and I was into whatever the rock music. I listened to, like, you know, I would buy Police records, or, you know, the Clash, you know, the Specials. And then I would also have, you know, Parliament records and the Motown stuff, and the Beatles. I mean, Jimi Hendrix. I wasn't interested in jazz, because my idea of jazz was like the stuff that the Berkeley High Jazz Band played, you know.
Right.
And I was just like, this is the worst music ever. Even though, like, Friends, you know, I mean, that's like a very heavy jazz band with just ridiculous, like, who's who list of people who've gone through it. But I was just like, I was like 16 years old. I was playing gigs with guys that were in their 40s playing, you know, blues and rockabilly and R&B music, and I was just like, no, this jazz stuff I don't like that. And they play like stuff that, you know, was kind of like, I guess people would call fusion, and I don't know, if this is jazz, I don't really want to hear this, you know.
Yeah.
But then I spent a lot of time at the Berkeley Public Library, and just started checking out records. And, you know, one of the guys in one of those bands I played in, he goes, you know, you should really listen to Charlie Christian. Just ask, who's that, you know?
Right.
And you should really go and check that out. And so I got the one record there was, you know, and I checked it out. And that completely changed my whole thing. So, you know, I started with that, and then I got into, you know, Wes Montgomery a couple of years later, and Joe Pass and all that stuff. So really, I didn't come at jazz from any kind of a music school thing at all. You know, I came at it from the guitar vernacular, which is really kind of an in through the outdoor kind of way to come at it. But that's how I got into that music.
You know, I was just going to say, I mean, part of my show is really always predicated on, it's really hard to develop new language and music in the walls of academia. And I'm not trying to rip on academia, but I think that to me, it's confounding just talking to you is just the idea that you really are a street scholar of music. I mean, you were not trained academically, and I think that you pushed yourself out there, and a lot of your success can be attributed to the fact that you learned on the street. And maybe it wasn't jazz you learned on the street. You were learning from Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, all these guys, you know. But in the Charlie, I really want, you know, this is an unfortunate crossover, but you spent many years, you know, woodshedding and cutting your teeth in Paris. And I wanted you to talk about the last time you were there, and ultimately why people are very down, and rightfully so, after these horrible attacks. But from what I'm told by cats, it is, and I haven't ever been to Paris, but even now it's supposed to be culturally a tremendously diverse, multicultural musical hub. I wanted you to talk about just trying to put a positive spin on the cultural vibrancy of Paris and how they're going to bounce back from this.
Right. Well, it's been a while since I've been there, to be honest. I'm trying to remember the last time, 3 or 4 years ago, probably. But I can tell you that I remember being there New Year's Eve, 1988 to 1989. And I just remember thinking about, well, what happens like in America on New Year's Eve? What do I remember? Well, people getting drunk and people shooting their guns into the air. And, you got to be careful. You got to watch out. And, you never know what's going to happen. Drunk drivers and, violence in the streets. That whole kind of thing,
Sure.
In the States, it's, what do they said in Brazil something that kind of resonated with me, which was, because I was like, man, I want to go out to see a real samba de pagode tonight. When they're sitting in a circle and playing, the old songs.
Sure.
And they were like, well, you really don't want to do that because blah 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 blah. It's dangerous. And then this friend of mine, he's a Brazilian musician, pulled me aside. He goes, listen, the thing you got to realize is that people in Brazil don't want to hurt you, but they have to sometimes. And he goes, in America, they don't have to hurt you, but they want to.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, that's deep. I'm American through and through, but I think that's very apt. So anyway, to get back to that New Year's Eve thing, I was just like, man, New Year's Eve, what my friends are like, no, man, my French friends are, we just hang out on the street. You're going to see it's the best thing ever. And I was just blown away, man. The streets just filled up with people, and the whole city was a party, and there was just nothing but goodwill, and everything was just very open, and people were very grown up and very liberal in the actual sense of the world, in the sense of the word, in terms of, everybody was putting out their positive energy and expected everybody else to reciprocate and be responsible about it. And, that's that's one of the memories that sticks the most in my mind about Paris.
Well, Hunter, I got to tell you, I had a ball. I'd like to do part 2 with you sometime after the new year if possible, because we got more ground to cover, and I really don't want to play any cheesy, smooth jazz tracks that are going to make you upset. So, but no.
Especially if I'm on them, it'll really make me upset.
Exactly. So, we're on a hard break, but it was great to hang with you, man, and we'll get this out into cyberspace as soon as possible, and we'll keep in touch, man.
Sounds great. Anytime, and thank you very much.
All the best, Charlie.
All right, you too. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
And we'll do it all again next week. This is another edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. Thanks to Jackson Kraft. See you later.
Dining at its best. Fox Sports trending now.
Under 20 seconds to go in the fourth quarter, 16th ranked Florida State with a 34-17 lead over NC State. Dalvin Cook over 100 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns for the Seminoles. Second-ranked Alabama currently scoreless with Mississippi State, about 7 minutes to go in the first quarter. Early first quarter, first-ranked Clemson with a 14-7 lead over Syracuse. Touchdowns there for Deshaun Watson and Wayne Gallman. Wake Forest and Notre Dame currently scoreless. Iowa State with a 14-7 lead over 8th-ranked Oklahoma State, about 6:58 to go in the first quarter there. 14th-ranked Michigan gets a touchdown pass from Jake Rudock to Jesu Chesson. They lead Indiana by a score of 7-3. Navy with a 7-0 lead over SMU, 4 minutes to go in the first quarter. Keenan Reynolds becomes the all-time career rushing touchdown leader in Division I history with his 78th of his career. Miami and